So, Adam, I feel bad because I think the last time you and I talked was when we did the other, but we we recorded the other episode in like March, and then I ran it in I think October for as a bonus for the spooky month because it was such, I mean, it made such an impression that I was like, I feel like this is the right time to share it, and I might get lost in the shuffle otherwise. That is not the case on this episode. You are here because you wanted to talk about this with me, but this was something that I had programmed, Harold and Maude, a movie that I had been putting off watching probably as long as I've been doing this. And this isn't something that I necessarily knew about before I started really getting into film with a capital I. But Adam, it's been a long time since I had you on, is what I'm trying to say, and it feels like a shame.
I know we were on a roll there with the Peter Bogdanovich films. We did Last Picture Show. We did What's Up, Doc, and we were going to do Paper Moon, and somehow we got derailed, so we never got around to that.
Right. We need to read. Yeah, we still need to get back on that. I was enjoying that. I actually. We were talking before we started recording about your show, Adam's Corner, and you were talking about your top 10. I didn't ask you, but you were talking about your top 10 movies of last year. I would say if in terms of like top 10 movies, maybe not like a new movie, but a new watch for me, I would say What's Up, Doc would actually be in the like top. I would say two of the movies that you brought to the show. Yeah, I would say at least. Yeah, two of them would be in my top 10. What's Up, Doc, and the other. Like, those were really fun and terrifying in the other one's case, but those would have made my list. And I complete credit to you because those were things that I was like, what do you want to talk about? You were like, these two movies, which one I had heard of and the other I hadn't. And they would have made my top 10 if I had one, but I'm not cool enough to do that. Well, I don't know if that's the case. I don't know. Like, I feel like my top 10 would be so bad because, like, for the most part, I don't necessarily go and see new things. And the new things that I see, like, they're good for the most part. But, like, the stuff that I'm excited about is the stuff that, like, I get to watch for the show. And then I get to talk about it on the show. So, like, I don't know. Like, new movies are fine, right? Like, I like new movies, but I enjoy a lot of the older stuff a lot more because, I don't know, it's just more interesting sometimes.
Well, yeah, something seems to have been lost, even with filmmakers whose previous works I've enjoyed. Even they seem to have lost a step, and it's a really weird time that we're in. New films are, coming around, and and it's easier to see things than it ever was at any time. With the streaming and all of that, and the theatrical window is shorter. But like Paul Thomas Anderson is a good example. I love Paul Thomas Anderson and Boogie Nights and Magnolia. Those are movies that really hit home for me. And yet his last film I just didn't think it was good at all. Licorice Pizza. I was extremely disappointed with that. And so that's one example of, a filmmaker who has let me down. And there's been more than one, trust me. But it's funny that you talk about my top 10 films because my favorite film, and by the way, I'll say it warms the cockles of my heart to hear that you enjoyed two of the films I recommended last year. So let me go ahead and get that out there.
I don't remember what was the third one again? I mean,
The Last Picture Show was the other one.
Oh yeah. Oh God. Oh Jesus. No, the three. That's right. God. I mean, that would probably be up there, and like that would be like one, that might be two. Like that was, I mean, again, like that movie not only lived up to the expectations, like I mean, yeah, God, that's the thing. I felt, God, it almost felt like that was 2022 when we did that. Like, I don't know, 2023 was a very weird year. It felt very before and after a certain point. And so like, God, Last Picture Show. Okay. Yeah.
We did all those. Yeah, last year we did all three of those. It was we were on a roll there for a while, and then we got sidetracked. So, but no, what I was going to say was my favorite film last year was directed by Alexander Payne, and that was The Holdovers. That was my favorite film. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure I'm going to be revisiting it probably every year at Christmas because it is a Christmas themed film, and Alexander Payne's films have a certain kinship with the director that we're going to be talking about tonight. That's what I was going to on this episode. There's a lot of similarities, and especially with The Holdovers, I felt a lot of Hal Ashby, not to spoil the, not to jump ahead here, but Hal Ashby is the man responsible for the film we're going to be talking about. And I think Alexander Payne has a lot in common with his sensibilities, and I really felt it strongly on the holdovers. It looks like it was shot in 1971 or two. It's just amazing. It even has the rated R certificate on a blue background. You remember how you used to see that? You'll see some of those on old VHS tapes or whatever. It even has that. It's just such a retro looking film. They did such a great job. And of course, Paul Giamatti's just great. Nobody does curmudgeon like Paul Giamatti, and having a touch of curmudgeon myself, certainly, I guess that's why I feel a kinship anytime I see Paul Giamatti in a film. So yeah, I always, in fact, I've been told by quite a few of my close friends that Sideways, that he also collaborated with Alexander Payne on, that they said, if you substitute wine for film, you're that guy, because
oh my God.
You're that picky because you won't date a woman if she doesn't respond to certain movies, and because he's constantly saying if she likes Merlot, that's it. I'm not, and so
right.
I'm kind of like that guy. So I said, well, guilty as charged. So
I mean, you know what? Again, Adam, you know what? Like, that is why I love you, because you are you. And that is the most endearing thing about you, is like, but seriously, like, and that's the thing that I love about getting to do this, is getting to meet people that are passionate about things. Because at a time and place long before now, we both existed when being passionate about things made you uncool and unexciting to people, and a nerd or whatever. And now, and like, apathy was at an all-time high. And I'm not saying you can't be apathetic now, but I think it is much more cool. And I think we as society would agree that it's more cool to be passionate about stuff and to give a shit, as opposed to not give a shit. I'm not saying, again, there are certain things to not give a shit about, but giving a shit about the things you love, or doing good, or something to that effect, like, I think is a lot better than just not caring at all. So that's cool in my book. And you know what? I mean, Sideways is a great movie. And Paul Giamatti's great in that movie. And I do like your transition, because like you mentioned on this episode of the Culture Cast, I am still your host, Chris Dashiell, and I'm joined by the host of Adam's Corner, a podcast that you can find on the internet, Adam Long.
Yes. And I thank you for having me back again. I just, I do hate that there's been such a gap, but, life happens, and we wasn't intentional, but, I'm just glad to be back on as a guest. I always enjoy bantering it up with you. And we always, the time just flies, and it really does when we do these shows. I just blink and it seems like an hour or more has passed. So, and months, I think close to 6 months since we last chatted, and it's like no time has passed at all every time we reconnect. So it's funny how that works. And that's a sign of a good friend, where you can just pick it up where you left off half a year ago, and it's like no time has passed. So that's always a good thing.
You took the words right out of my mouth. And you know what's funny? Like, since the last time we talked, you are, like I mentioned, again, not to bury the lead, but you are your own podcast host now. So you do if you want to tell the audience a little bit about what your show is, if they were to go and listen to Adam's Corner, what they would be hearing.
Well, I used to be the home entertainment correspondent for Movie Geeks United, and I reported on physical media releases every month. I've been doing that since 2014, I guess, and Movie Geeks had been around since 2007. So I joined them when they were roughly about 7 years old. Jamie Duvall, the creator of the show, had asked me. I was a fan of the show and called in frequently, and he finally just said, why don't you just come on and be a home entertainment correspondent? And so I did, and really found it to be something that I enjoyed more than I thought I would. I write for a local publication. I'm in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. It's actually a print publication, but it's also online, focused newspaper. And I'm a member of the Southeastern Film Critics and North Carolina Film Critics, so I vote for those organizations when the awards come along. So I was already doing that when Jamie asked me to join the Movie Geeks team, and I did. And then Jamie decided this past summer of 2023 that he just didn't want to do it anymore. The passion had left him, and he said, I've interviewed pretty much everybody that I wanted to. I mean, on his show, he had at different points, Francis Ford Coppola, James Cameron, Brian De Palma. The list of people that he's had on there is pretty amazing. It's staggering. And
holy shit.
Jamie was lucky in that his podcast was one of the first. And so he got in at the starting gate. And so podcasting was a new thing. And so a lot of these directors were curious. And so he had done, for instance, he did a 1 week series of live shows where they got as many of Brian De Palma's collaborators as they could possibly get, and they covered a film each night. And they would have like Paul Hirsch, his editor, or William Finley, who's in Phantom of the Paradise, and Nancy Allen, who's in Dressed to Kill. And they had so many for an entire week. They did that. You can find those shows online. And apparently Brian De Palma was listening, and it was podcasting in its infancy. And so when it came time for De Palma to promote his next film, well, he reached out to the movie geeks, and so he came on, and of course they were like, I'm gonna
route, as any one of us would be.
Yeah, so it was pretty, So those are the kind of things. So Jamie had the fortuitous, I guess foresight is the word I'm looking for, to start the podcast at a time when it was, it was a new thing, and so he'd kind of done everything he had wanted to do. I think the only people that he didn't get to interview that he wanted to and tried multiple times was Al Pacino. We actually went to a screening together for City Hall, where Al Pacino sat 3 rows in front of us on this. We were 3 rows from the stage, and he was within the distance where he could actually talk to Mr. Pacino. And we didn't have any luck getting him on. That was the bad thing. But he tried, and Oliver Stone was the other one. We've tried multiple times there. And that kind of amazed us, because Oliver Stone has been on some questionable podcasts, shall we say, that are of less caliber than Jamie's show. So, but he chooses to do what he wants to do. So anyway, Jamie said, I think I've pretty much done it, and I just kind of reached out there to the fans that I do have, and I said, you guys want me to keep doing this? You want me to just hang it up and ride off into the sunset? I can do that, whatever you want. Oh, they begged me not to stop doing what I was doing. So I just decided, instead of making it just a movie show, that I would make it also about just basically obsessions of mine, whether it's television shows I grew up with or pop music. I'm a big, huge, I call myself a Billboard chartaholic, because I have this weird ability to tell you exactly how high a song placed on the Billboard charts if it was popular between the 50s and the 90s. I kind of got out of that once we entered this century, but for about 40 years there, I'm pretty good about telling you if somebody was truly a one-hit wonder or they weren't. And so I'm as obsessive about that as I am about film. So so I figured it was a good place for me to interview people who were not just in film, but pop music, or in the case of one of the people I interviewed is a guy who I'm he's got an online radio station called The Awfully Awesome 80s. I'm a big fan of that. I reached out to him. I had him on. We talked about one-hit wonders who really weren't one-hit wonders. And so that's kind of some of the things that I'm doing. And the latest show that I had posted was I did an interview with Christopher Norris, who was on the TV show Trapper John MD, and she was also in Airport 75, which turns 50 this year. She's one of the few surviving cast members. So that's the kind of stuff I'm doing. I also had the creator of the Incredible Hulk television series, Mr. Kenneth Johnson, came on for the 3rd episode, and he shared some rare behind-the-scenes photographs that had never been seen from the set of the Hulk, which we did a video, and I posted that as a bonus on a YouTube channel. So so that's kind of what I'm doing now, and I still do the Blu-ray shows. I do those once a month, and usually we'll reach out to somebody to come on and banter it up with me, somebody who's into physical media. My son has joined me twice because he's a physical media collector as well, and the shows with my son and I seem to be a favorite of people who listen. So there's that too. So that's kind of how it all happened. It's a long, shaggy dog story, and I apologize for the long-windedness, but I'm guilty of that more often than not.
I'm just sitting here listening. There's no long-windedness as far as I'm concerned. So, I will say, again, like you mentioned, doing a podcast, and then especially what you're doing, a weekly podcast, is it's nothing to sneeze at. And it's impressive. And again, I am impressed, and again, super excited to listen to your show. I have listened to some episodes, and I think, again, what you're doing is great, and giving yourself an opportunity to talk about the things you care about and sharing that with other people is cool. That's what I try to do. I know that's what so many of us try to do with the movie podcast side of things, or just, pop culture podcasts in general, is, sharing. Ultimately, it's about sharing or talking about or analyzing the stuff that makes us feel a certain way. I won't say love, because there are plenty of people that make content about stuff that I don't think they like at all. Yeah, which is cool. Like there's a time and place for that, but I don't think either one of us go into things that way. At least I don't try to. I mean, every now and then a movie comes along that really grinds my gears, as it were. This is not one of them, because on this episode of the Culture Cast, like Adam's kind of alluded to, we're going to be covering the first film of February, which is a romantic comedy, but this is a drama that, like you mentioned, is Alexander Payne. Definitely. I mean, yeah, Payne. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. We're going to be talking about 1971's Hal Ashby directed Harold and Maude.
Well, if you want to sing out, sing out. And if you want to be free, be free.
That he may bless and deliver all souls of the faithful departed, bring them to the bliss of heaven and eternal peace. O Lord, grant him forgiveness for all his sins. By the help of your grace, you who live and reign forever and ever. Amen.
She took my car.
And Harold?
Try something new each day. After all, we're given life to find it out. It doesn't last forever. Oh, it's all right. It's organic. Harold?
Maude?
Did I tell you I'll be 80 on Saturday?
This is definitely a new experience for me.
And the smell. All around us, living things. What sense in borders and nations and patriotism? Aim above morality. Take a chance. Get hurt even, but play as well as you can.
I haven't lived. I've died a few times.
Oh, Harold, everyone has the right to make an ass out of themselves. Can't let the world judge you too much.
Do you have any friends?
Maybe one.
Would you care to talk about this friend?
No.
Commingling with sagging breasts.
Absolutely no. Now, are you ready, Harold? Should women run for president of the United States? Well, I don't see why not. Absolutely yes. Is it difficult for you to accept criticism? Oh, no. Do you believe in capital punishment for murder? Absolutely yes.
War is not all black. Why, hell. World War II gave us the ballpoint pen. That's common knowledge.
Hey, where's my old lady?
I'll be gone by midnight.
What?
It's all right.
But it's organic.
So the film is directed by Hal Ashby, written by Colin Higgins, who I have seen a lot of his films recently, completely randomly, and it stars Ruth Gordon and Bud Cort as the titular Harold and Maude, a young man and an older woman who find companionship in one another. And that is like the one sentence description of this movie, but there is so much more going on. I am super excited to talk about it with you, Adam. So I am going to kick it to you first. What is your relationship with Harold and Maude?
Well, my relationship with the film goes back about 40 odd years, I guess I would say. We first got cable in my house in August of 1982. This was also at the time when video stores were first popping up. Prior to this, the only way that you could see a film at home would be to either rented on 16 millimeter film. That was generally, there were catalogs you could rent 16 millimeter films, and people could pitch in, and everybody could chip in and rent a film. And they were expensive to rent, and you only got to keep them for about 3 days. But around the early 80s, things were changing, and you could go to the video store and cable. And I think cable channels were doing package deals. They were buying a lot of these older films in package deals, and they would show them over and over again. And Harold and Maude was one of those films. It was on Cinemax, and that's where I first caught it, I think on a Saturday morning. I think my father and I just happened to have the Cinemax on, and there it was, and I'd heard the title. I was about 12 years old at the time. And I was just really kind of gobsmacked by the film, and especially the ending. I just wasn't really quite prepared for the ending, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody. I know we're talking about a 53-year-old film at this point, but
we sure are.
Yeah.
I would say the statute of limitations has long expired on this movie, but we will be talking spoilers. But I do think, and I think you would agree, just to say broadly, again, and this is not something that I necessarily think matters in a lot of ways, but this is a movie I think you and I would broadly agree is worth checking out, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. It was the second film for Hal Ashby, and I didn't get a catch, and it was the first, I don't think it was the first film of his I'd seen. I think before this, I had seen Bound for Glory, which is his biopic of Woody Guthrie. I'd seen that on CBS when it ran on the CBS, I think, Tuesday Night Movie or something. So I saw that in the late 70s, and Being There, which was his film with Peter Sellers, that was actually filmed about 2 hours from where I live over at Biltmore House. And so that's the palatial estate that doubles for Melvin Douglas's character in the film. That's where they filmed. I'd say probably the biggest part of the film was shot at Biltmore House, and that's a major attraction in North Carolina. People go there at various times of the year to see it, especially in the fall and at Christmas. And so those were probably the first two Hal Ashby films that I had seen, but I knew the name because I was in third grade, I think, when Coming Home came out, and I remember seeing his name in the ads, but I was a little too young to see that at the time. So I guess Harold and Maude was probably the third of his films that I had seen, and I don't really think that I put the pieces together that his sensibilities until later on. But I knew that this was a different kind of film, that's for sure, because it was certainly the first time that I had ever encountered a couple, a romantic couple that was such a large gap in age, and that these people were drawn together in such a way that I was not used to seeing in conventional love stories of the time, of the early 80s or late 70s that I'd been exposed to. And it was definitely like a breath of fresh air. I didn't get a lot of the nuances or the deeper meanings of the film until I was much older, and I was revisiting it on subsequent viewings brought new layers of meaning to me. And then, I guess it was about 20 years ago, I finally sought out the script and read it. And the script is just a terrific read by Colin Higgins, as you mentioned. It's I think it was his first screenplay, I believe.
It was his thesis.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
Isn't that wild? I mean, hey, that's your thesis, man. It's like Dark Star. Like, holy shit, I would love for that to have been my thesis. Like, come on.
Yeah. Some people, they just have talent right from the get-go, and it's very evident. And this was reading his script, and a lot of times you read a script and it's not a good read. It's just a blueprint for the film. But you read the script for Harold and Maude, and you're laughing out loud as you read it, and it reveals things that they're in the film, but I don't think they didn't resonate as strongly to me until after I'd read the script and went back and rewatched the film, and I think it gave me an even deeper appreciation of the film. So if anybody out there listening has never read the screenplay, I would recommend getting that, and because it's a terrific read. It just really is, and you just see that this was a guy who really had talent, and that would be proven over and over again with his especially with his next film, Silver Streak, which I think it has just about everything that you could possibly want in a film. There's romance, and there's a disaster movie type subplot at the end of the film. There's a murder mystery. There's everything you want in Silver Streak, and so this was not a one trick pony. He was certainly a real talent who was unfortunately cut down way too short by AIDS in an AIDS casualty in the late '80s. And that's a shame, because I would have loved to have seen what he would have gone on to do. And apparently he had a very good friendship with Dolly Parton. Of course, they met on the set of 9 to 5, and then she specifically requested that he be in charge of writing and directing The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. So they were very, very close from what I understand. So yeah, other people could obviously see his talent as well, but it's very much on display, even though this is a Hal Ashby film. And Hal Ashby has a certain sensibility too, and so I think it's a good meshing of the both of them. It's really a perfect project for they just blend so well together with this film, and the casting, of course, Ruth Gordon, she won the Oscar for, I believe, Rosemary's Baby for Best Supporting Actress. I want to say she did, or she was at least nominated, I believe. So if she didn't win, I can't remember right off the top of my head, but. So this was kind of in the phase of her career revival. And of course, Bud Cort, coming off of MASH, was, this was like one of his early, and there was Brewster McCloud. So he'd done those Robert Altman films, but this was one of his first non-Altman projects, I guess you would say. And he looks so young in this film. He just has such an innocence about him in the film. And she, Maude, played by Ruth Gordon, has such a world-weary, look. And there's a lot of stuff going on there that we do find out. And I like how it's revealed that she was a Holocaust survivor, that it's gradually revealed. It's not, and you can maybe speak to that a little bit too. What your thoughts on how they choose to reveal that in the film? That she's seen a lot of dark stuff in her life, but refuses to let that she refuses to not see the good in life, even though she's seen a lot of the worst in life. And so she has an indomitable spirit, as it were. And probably about 41 years ago since I first encountered this film, and it just grows and grows and grows. And I just recently saw it on the new Paramount Blu-ray that came out a couple of years ago that has a splendid transfer and good audio video transfer there. So I would recommend that. Unfortunately, no 4K, just a Blu-ray, but maybe someday.
I was actually talking with a friend of mine, Ryan Verrill of Disconnected, if there was a 4K of this, and he said no, because he's a physical media guy like yourself, and I believe he has the same box set that this is in, right? It's a Blu-ray set. Yeah.
It has the packaging where it has the reproduction of the poster as you open up the case. It's just it's a single disc set, but it's really well done for the film. It's a good presentation. There was an earlier Criterion release, but this one I think supersedes it in terms of the transfer for me anyway on my equipment. So anyway,
nice. Yeah, so for me, I had never seen this movie before, but it is a movie that I have heard about countless times. Close friend of the show, frequent guest, co-host, Father Malone was supposed to join us on this episode, and unfortunately he wasn't able to. And this is a movie that I know holds a very special place in his heart. And that was one of the reasons that I wanted to cover it this year, was to finally watch something that I know he cares a lot about. Now, I know that this is a movie that obviously, I mean, again, 41 years is a good span of time to have history with a movie like this. And I can see this being a movie that every time you revisit it at certain times in life, it may have a certain the meaning may feel different, or the what you take away from it may feel a little different. It feels like that kind of movie in a way, and I think all good films that dabble in existentialism, I think a lot of them do have that sense of timelessness, and I think that there's a timelessness to this movie that I really appreciate. It takes place in 71, but it could take place at any time, at any place in time. Because again, like the story that they're telling about two people drawn together that, again, for all intents and purposes, outwardly, you would not think, because again, one of them is 79 and the other one is, again, they never say how old he is. Yeah, he's probably in his late teens,
15,
early
16,
20s.
17, I would think. Yeah, maybe.
Right. But I mean, the story is so timeless, and the two of them, Ruth Gordon and Bud Cort, are just amazing. I mean, the chemistry that they have together, it's just, you know where the story is headed from the moment they meet, and the inevitability of the film chugs along and you can feel it, and she alludes to it several times, and again, like, alludes to it, but again, if you're listening and you're really picking up what the movie is laying down, it will be obvious where it is headed. And even though it's going to go there, and there's an inevitability to it, the story is just so moving, and them together, it just works. Like, I believe it, and I'm not saying, and I know you kind of mentioned this, the idea of like, it is an unconventional relationship, at least in terms of cinematic expectations. Like, and not a lot of other movies have done this kind of relationship this sincerely, frankly. I mean, again, like, when you've got this movie, I don't know if you need to do another movie this sincere. But again, like, sincere, but in a very honest way. And there's a difference, because there's false sincerity and there's honest sincerity. And this movie is very honest, which I think is also something that could feel off-putting for some, but I think the best movies really challenge you as a film goer to suspend your expectations for things and maybe meet the movie in the middle. And I think this movie kind of expects that from the audience, because again, I mean, if you go into this saying, oh, Ruth Gordon and Bud Cort, there's no way, and it's like, no, I mean, the movie gets over that hill immediately, frankly.
Yeah, it does.
And like, that's the thing, it's like the movie doesn't, and like, the movie does such a good job of getting over that hill so like effortlessly. You believe it, that like, you believe at the moment, like, there's no moment where you start believing it versus not. Like, it's just, it's obvious from the moment they meet, and everything about them, again, is just so, it feels so real. And yeah, I'm so glad I finally got to watch it. And there's a lot to parse through. There's a lot to break down. But I think the first direction to go is the idea of, I mean, again, because you mentioned, and this is something, again, that the movie does an interesting thing in that it talks about, and it does, I mean, like, the concentration camp stuff is there, but like, it doesn't get in the way. Because I would say, like, to call this a Holocaust movie is kind of a weird thing, but in a way, like, it's about the experiences of a Holocaust survivor sharing their life experiences, even if it's not directly what happened to them, with someone who has never experienced life in a meaningful way and doesn't feel like they can either. That's the other thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on kind of the Holocaust and concentration camp angle of the film, because again, like, I'm not saying I'm surprised by it. It wasn't something I immediately jumped to when I watched the movie the first time. But when I went back and started doing research and reading, and like you mentioned, especially with the script, like, there are some things in the script that make it a little bit more obvious what is kind of, quote, not quote, going on, but again, what the underlying kind of subtext of the movie is.
Yeah, I think, I like how it's gradually revealed, as I mentioned earlier, because then you slowly start to understand why she embraces life, because she has seen the fragility of life and how, we're all hanging by a thread, whether we want to believe that or not. And it doesn't, all it takes is a split second of some horrific thing happening, and it's all over. And she knows that. She knows, she's been there. She's seen that from the front lines. And, it gives you an appreciation of life that you can't have, that an average person couldn't have had they not experienced that. And I think that's why it's so important to things that she does later on in the film, especially toward the conclusion, because, she knows that, she's seen the best and the worst, I guess is what I'm trying to say, in mankind. And and that is kind of solidified when you do see it's revealed by the numbers on her arm, as it were, in the film, that she was indeed a survivor. So I think that's my feeling about it, is that and so with her having gone through that, then she becomes somewhat of a mentor in a way to Harold as well, not just a romantic partner, but also teaches him a little bit about life. And and of course he's obsessed with death anyway. They meet at a funeral. Meet cute.
Yeah,
meet cute.
Right. It's wild, that scene where they meet. Like
yes.
I mean, it makes perfect sense with where the movie ultimately heads, but like that,
sure.
you gotta applaud the movie for making a scene that has no right being as endearing as it is, very endearing for the two characters in it, who are just there admiring the funeral procession, as it were.
Yeah. This is true. And then you find out that not only is she interested in, and her obsession maybe isn't quite as, I don't know that she's obsessed, but with death as much as Harold is. He's more obsessed, I think, than she is. But she, as I said, she's just interested in life and the meaning of life. I think that's more about where it's coming from for her. That's the way I always picked up on it. Whereas he really is obsessed with death, because he throughout the film he commits these fake suicides, and some of them are pretty hilarious and quite amusing. That was one of the first takeaways that I had with the film when I saw it the first time, were the fake suicides, and at the beginning of the film it's done in such a way that you're not sure what this is all about. It's like, oh, the guy just offed himself. And then you see that it's just an obsession that he has, and he's trying to he's kind of in a game of one-upsmanship, as it were, because he keeps trying to top himself with the fake suicides.
Right.
If you think the last one was bad, just wait till you see the next one. Oh, Harold.
Right. And that's the thing that I mean, again, like, it's really interesting. And with where the movie goes, especially how the movie opens, like you mentioned, with him committing suicide. And again, like, I think that obviously, in the day and age that we live in now, you can get demonetized on YouTube for even saying the word. And obviously, I mean, again, like, I understand why. I don't necessarily agree with it, but at the same time, like, this movie uses it in a way that I have not seen a movie use it, which is, you ask yourself, what is the purpose of what he's doing? And the purpose to what he's doing is, again, like, I don't think he understands the concept of death, even like remotely. I mean, again, like, what is he trying to do by killing himself constantly is what I was trying to figure out while I was watching it. Because again, like, the scenes are played humorously, and then, he starts out kind of on his own doing it, and then he becomes kind of more over the top and kind of exhibitionary in what he's doing. I mean, one of the women that his mom brings over to the house, he lights himself on fire seemingly in front of her, which, again, like, self-immolation, pretty gnarly. But like, to what end is he doing that? And in some ways it's like to shock these people that his mom is bringing around, but also I think it's to show, like, he's obsessed with death, but I don't think he understands the concept of death, like, at all. Like, I think that he's obsessed with something and he's trying to understand it by engaging in it, but because you can't really engage in it more than once, as it were, he's doing all of these fake suicides. And again, like you said, they start escalating. I mean, he hangs himself in the first one, and then by the end of it, he's got like a gun and he's shooting himself, or he's in a pool. It's like, he escalates to the point where they're becoming like hilariously theatrical, and he's involving other people by accident. And again, it's like he's learning about death by engaging in death in a way that, again, like, okay, like, I don't know if there are actual people doing this for this purpose, but in the framing and context of the movie, it makes sense paired with the character of Maude.
Yeah. That's a good take on it. Good read. And I think there's a certain rebelliousness to his character as well. I've always kind of had that sort of thing going on too. Just kind of, you just want to, sometimes you just want to get a rise out of people. And I've been guilty of that from time to time. I try to be a nice guy. I try to go along to get along, but every now and then I'll be in a situation where it's just everybody's so serious, and I'm like, I just want to get a rise out of these people. I want to do something ridiculous. and just shake it up here. And so he's like that all the time, I think, and I think we all have those moments where we feel like we're just almost suffocating because everybody's just being so serious, and you just want to do something to break up the monotony of the situation. But like I said, this is not an occasional thing for Harold. He's like this all of the time, or basically from what I'm seeing. But yes, as you said, he doesn't really seem to. It's kind of death is kind of a joke, a ghastly joke to him, and he just laughs it off until he is faced with the actual death of somebody who is very important to him, which you can stop the show now if you don't want to hear how the film ends. But but
I mean, again, I feel like it's obvious, right? Yeah. From like where the movie, where their relationship starts. It's like I feel like it's kind of like faded, right?
Yeah, that's true. But when Maude, once Maude decides to take her own life, and she keeps alluding to it throughout the film, and then she finally gets to a point where she actually does it. She feels like it's time to go, and she's made peace with that decision, and she's chosen to do it herself. And so then his character grows because he's faced with an actual death as opposed to the theatrical kind, and so that exhibits, which is one of the things that make that we look for in a good film, is growth of the character. And Harold grows because he's faced with a real death as opposed to an orchestrated one. So I think that's the thing. But along the way, there are a lot of amusing scenes that I certainly enjoy. I always enjoy the attempts to get him into the military. With the recruiter with the who's missing an arm.
Yeah, Charles Tyner as Harold's uncle. For the scenes that he's in, makes an impact. He's
yes.
I mean, he's great. And then towards the end of the movie, where you see Harold and Maude kind of concoct a plan to keep Harold out of the military, which ends up resulting in him killing her, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. I love that scene, and I love that he's I mean, again, like Bud Cort and Ruth Gordon are so good together, but Bud Cort on his own, he plays such a, I mean, like the moment you see him on screen, when you kind of get what he's doing, everything about him is just so interesting, and he's just portraying such a fully realized character. And I kind of alluded to having seen Colin Higgins' stuff a lot recently. I just recently, for the first time, watched Foul Play, which I really enjoyed. Last year, I saw 9 to 5 and The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, which are the other two movies that he directed and wrote, along with Foul Play. And, I mean, Best Little Whorehouse has its problems. I'm not sure that they're his fault necessarily. I think it's more just the narrative writ large, which he didn't come up with the original narrative. Mm-hmm. I think that his movies are fantastic, and the ones that I've seen, and I agree with you. It is a shame that he was taken so early, because you really wonder what he could have done with like just some of the actors in the 90s or the 2000s, or I mean, again, any actors, because again, he inspired so many people. In a lot of ways, like Colin Higgins' stuff and Hal Ashby's stuff inspired, someone I'm not a huge fan of, but Wes Anderson, I think, is kind of like the next logical progression in a certain direction of this kind of filmmaking. You mentioned Alexander Payne. I think he's the logical progression in a certain direction of this kind of filmmaking. I think they both take their unique stabs at it. I think Wes Anderson comes at it a little bit more leaning into the quirk, and I think Alexander Payne leans more on like the naturalism of things and kind of just like real-ish people having elevated-ish interactions with each other. Like that's the thing, with Alexander Payne and Sideways, a movie that I adore, and I love Thomas Hayden Church and Paul Giamatti in that movie. I mean, they're a lot of fun, and I think that their pairing is great. I mean, again, if you're into wine, awesome. But if like you mentioned at the beginning, like if you're a person who is passionate about things, it's also kind of a love letter to people who feel a certain way about certain things and will see no other, which is great. Like, again, like I think that's an interesting subtext to Sideways, but I think that to come back to a movie like this, you can see a lot of those ideas of just like interesting characters interacting with each other interestingly. And like that, and I don't know how else to put it, because like Alexander Payne, for the most part, writes and directs his own stuff. And the characters that he creates are, again, in a lot of ways, things that are very unique to the kinds of movies that he makes. And I would say the same here. Like all of Colin Higgins' stuff, for the most part, feels very similar, the stuff that I've seen. And like, I appreciate it for that. I appreciate that he seems very capable at making characters that feel real. Even if the situations are a little kind of elevated in terms of realism, the characters feel really grounded and like real people. Like Harold and Maude, for the most part, feel like real people. And that's why it's so easy to connect with them, because it feels like such a genuine relationship, because they feel so genuine.
Yeah, they sure do. Yeah, and you've met people similar to them in life, probably, and maybe not as extreme as Harold with his fake suicides, but you know, I've known people who were in that wheelhouse, shall we say, and so yeah, they do seem, and that's what we're missing in a lot of films today, is just characters that have a real depth to them and are relatable on a human level. You're just not, you know, even in a lot of these, the independently made films that are critics' darlings these days, a lot of the times these characters seem aloof and just not, you know, it's something that's missing. I mean, occasionally you'll get it, like with The Holdovers, as we mentioned. That is an example of a film that has fully fleshed out characters, but it's becoming rarer and rarer, as it were. And that's a shame, but but Hal Ashby certainly paved the way for a lot of filmmakers making personal films. Of course, he had a rough run of it in the 80s, and his career really, as the decade of the 70s made way for the 80s, he just really had a series of setbacks for various reasons with films that he released during the 80s. And of course, he passed away before the decade was over. I think it was at the end of 1988, but he had multiple cancers. I think lung cancer. I can't remember. And there was others too, I think. But yeah, he died fairly young too. So he and Colin Higgins, both the architects of this film, they both passed away within, I think, a year of each other. So it's sad to think that they've been going on 40 years now, close to it. So yeah, it's something to really consider.
Well, and also given the fact that the movie at the time was not a critical or commercial success. I mean, this is a movie. I mean, this is a movie that has really found a life in the subsequent years. I mean, like subsequent as in like a decade later. And I mean, plus, I mean, this is a movie that I think is immensely important. I mean, the National Film Registry agrees as much. And I think that this is a very important movie for, I mean, again, at least like having the conversation about life and death and what is the point of not caring about one and caring about the other, or vice versa, and how can you meet those in the middle. And I think that this is an important movie, again, in terms about the subtext of the Holocaust, and, you know, again, like that, it being kind of like a musing on that and using that as a justification and way of giving you, the audience, an idea of where this character has been and why this character is doing the things that they're doing and why they feel a certain way.
Yeah.
And it informs the decision that they're making. But this was not a movie that at the time people were like, National Film Registry, that was not a thing. Like, this is in the subsequent years. And like that, you can tell by watching this movie that this movie at the time, it was not going to be a movie that people were going to be able to watch and be like, okay, I get it. And that's crazy. Like we've talked about the Academy Awards a little bit. It's shocking that this movie got nothing. Like I'm shocked that this movie was not, like, that Ruth Gordon wasn't nominated for an Oscar, because she's so good, and Bud Cort is so good too. Mm-hmm. But again, like this movie, they didn't get it in 71. Like they really didn't get it, is what it feels like. And like sometimes movies do come out before their time. That is a thing. And this movie is genuinely one of them.
Well, yeah, I think there was a 1-2 punch that actually kind of got this film back in the consciousness after its failure when it was released, as you mentioned, because it did. It was issued, and then it just kind of died a quick death. And then the Westgate Theater in Minneapolis, which was a repertory theater, they started running it, and it became such a runaway success that they ran it for 2.5 years, I believe it was. And so much so that the residents in the area started picketing the theater and requesting that they finally run something else, so that because they'd run the film for so long. There's actually a podcast on that I listened to. I think it was the Mubi. They do a podcast, the independent streaming service Mubi, MUBI. They did a series on repertory revivals. Theaters that had led to rediscovery of films, and this was one of the episodes they did. It's a very fascinating story about how it was revived after it was originally considered dead. And then Danny Perry's cult movies, I think his series of cult movies books, it was there's a chapter on it in there, and I think that actually also got people talking about it again. So that was a 1-2 punch, I think. And then you had the added benefit, as we talked about, of cable. Because it was part of the package deal that ran on pay cable in the early 80s. And so with all of that together, I think that's kind of how I got restarted. And of course, Ashby went on to the next year he did, or 2 years later, rather, he did The Last Detail with Jack Nicholson, which was a success. And then Shampoo, which is maybe even a bigger success. I'm not sure with Warren, although there's been rumors that Warren Beatty co-directed that film, as he was known to do. But nevertheless, it's credited to Hal Ashby. So there is that. But yes, this was one of those films that just failed to, register during its original release. And that does happen sometimes. And time is the ultimate judge on films. Just because something fails when it originally is released doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to have some sort of a life, as has been proven many, many times by many other films. So, yeah.
I don't know if you saw, but I'll read you Ebert's 1.5 star review out of 4.
Wow.
And so what we get, finally, is a movie of attitudes. Harold is death, Maude life, and they manage to make the two seem so similar that life's hardly worth the extra bother. The visual style makes everyone look fresh from the wax museum, and all the movie lacks is a lot of day-old gardenias and lilies and roses in the lobby, filling the place with a cloying sweet smell. Nothing more to report today. Harold doesn't even make pallbearer. Wow. Roger Ebert really enjoyed being an asshole sometimes. I mean, you know what? Like, he did. He enjoyed it sometimes. Like, he reveled in being able to verbally dismantle a movie, and he was entitled to his opinion. But I think Mr. Ebert was wrong on this one. But I understand this movie not resonating with you. Like, that's the thing. Like, I mean, again, like I joke, he liked being an asshole. And again, like, he's entitled to his opinion, but I'm not going to necessarily disagree, because I think this movie oscillates so widely at times, but that's an intentional thing that I could see it rubbing someone the wrong way.
Well, and to give Ebert some credit, there were films that he really didn't get when he saw them originally, and he would go back and revisit them, and then he would come back around and write an updated review and say, hey, I kind of missed this when it first was released. I didn't really get it, but now I think it's one of the great films. There are several incidences where he finally came around to things. So he was, a lot of times you will see, like Pauline Kael famously would see a film one time and her opinion was made up, and she's like, well, I don't need to see a film a second time. My opinion is my opinion. But Ebert was man enough to occasionally admit, hey, I was wrong. I missed this, I missed that. So yeah, he could be a bit of a curmudgeon, to use that word again, occasionally, but he would, admit when he was wrong and that he missed something. And so I always gave him credit for that. And I'm not sure if he came around on Harold and Maude. I would be interested to know if he ever felt differently as time went on. But yeah, there were several films that he just didn't like. The original Night of the Living Dead. He was
notoriously,
yeah. But then eventually came around. He came around and said it's one of the great horror films. I missed it, And then I think The Devils, Ken Russell's The Devils. He didn't care for that either. But I think eventually he felt a little differently about that too. So there were some times when he just hated something, and then it's like, well. And I do think that's where Pauline Kael could be wrong in not wanting to go back, and because you sometimes miss things. There have been films that I totally, if I'd seen Vertigo when I was a teenager and I really didn't get it, and it was mainly because I hadn't had profound loss in my life, and as I got older and suffered some profound losses, and went back and watched Vertigo, I saw what a masterpiece it was. It's a film that you literally have to have lost in order to appreciate the film. And so that's one example of many that I could cite that, if you're a young whippersnapper, you're not going to get the things out of that film that you will as a more seasoned human being, as it were. So that's interesting that he gave it 1.5 stars, though I find that very curious, and I will go and look that review up. I'll be interested to read it. Yes.
He never came back to it, so not that I could find. To answer your question, I never found.
Okay.
I never found Ebert changing his mind. It also shows up on several lists of in lots of things that I found. People talk about Ebert being dismissive of the movie, but yet if you go and look on the website, it gives the film a thumbs up. So I don't. What the fuck? 1.5 stars out of 4 and a thumbs up. I fail to see how that's possible, but maybe I'm just confused. Maybe it's it's trying to split the difference. 1.5 stars, but thumbs up because we can acknowledge the fact that it's a culturally important movie. It might not just be for you, and that's the thing. I mean, again, there are parts of this movie that I could 100% see rubbing a contemporary audience the wrong way, like someone younger than me. Not to be the wokester of the group, but again, with something like suicide being played for laughs, that is not a thing that is done in contemporary media. It's just not. It's really just not. And again, I have no feeling on it either way. I know people who have. I know people who have attempted it. It does not trigger me. I mean, again, it's a storytelling device that has been used forever, will continue to be used, and it is what it is in a lot of ways, frankly. Sometimes you just have to get there. Do we have to revel in it? No. Do we have to make it something that people are enjoying doing or appreciative of? No. But again, it's something that can be treated with a level of seriousness. The subversiveness of this movie is the fact that it doesn't treat it that way. And I mean, Colin Higgins, again, in a lot of ways, I feel like he is a subversive writer. And he approaches that subversiveness head on. I mean, we have multiple suicide attempts in the movie, and they're all staged. I mean, they're all very theatrical, and they become more theatrical the longer the movie goes on. And that's the thing that, again, I feel like would rankle some people in 2024, but at the same time, it's the thing about the movie that I appreciate, and you've mentioned it. It's the movie understands what it's doing. Regardless of the time and space that the movie exists in, the message remains the same, which is, again, you cannot have a life worth living if you don't want to live your life at all. And if you don't live your life, you can't complain the day death comes and gets you because you didn't live for anything. And that's an important message. And that's something to definitely internalize in our ever changing and fast paced times. It's very easy to get caught in the same loop or the same pattern of doing things and, taking things and people and other stuff for granted. It can be done very easily. And this movie, I think, in a lot of ways makes the case that we should be enjoying the life that we're given, regardless of how we choose to live it. But we are given one life and we should enjoy it, because if we don't, we have nothing to complain about. You can't tell anyone. What does Maude say? You'll have nothing to tell anybody at the bar.
That's right. That's true. And how true it is. Well, what do you think about the unproduced sequel and prequel? It is worth mentioning.
Oh my God. Even then someone was like, well, we've got this IP here. And it made a lot of, I would, at 78, right? Higgins talked about doing a prequel and a sequel. I mean, the character of Harold, I think by the end of the film, I don't know if I really want to see more of his story, but at the same time, I would think it would be interesting to see more of the Harold story, and I think it would be interesting to see more of the Maude story, but I don't think it's necessary, because I think this movie does a good enough job at giving you an idea of what those things are without beating you over the head with it, or just exposition dumping in a scene. It does it in a way that is nuanced. And I mean, if Colin Higgins had written those movies, they probably would have been nuanced. But I mean, again, that's the only person I would want doing them. And he was the one who mentioned it, and they never happened. But I would have watched him. I mean, and we would have talked about him. What about yourself?
Well, yeah, the more interesting of the two was Grover and Maude, which was the one where there was the prequel you referred to. referenced rather. And supposedly it was going to get into how Maude learned to steal cars from Grover Muldoon, the character that was played by Richard Pryor in Silver Streak. So there was a crossover there, and he actually wanted Ruth Gordon and Richard Pryor to reprise their respective roles. So
the Higgins verse, HCU,
the Higgins verse. That's right.
Well, and I saw that, which made me want to watch Silver Streak. Like again, like Silver Streak sounds interesting from the way you've talked about it, and again, it came up in research a couple times because again that connection, and then just again the Colin Higgins connection. But I mean that sounds interesting because again there is this subplot of Maude stealing cars, and
that's right.
I never asked the question of how did she learn how to do it, but that could be an interesting part of a prequel story because again, like that is kind of a random thing that this older woman just seems to be able to do, which is every time she shows up in a different car because she's hot wiring cars because she doesn't have a car, doesn't have a license, doesn't believe in them, I guess is what she says.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Well, I think that would have been interesting. But yeah, I envy you that you haven't seen Silver Streak because I'm envious of people who it's a first time watch for them because it is such a really well made film, even though it's directed by Arthur Hiller, who was kind of a director for hire. He did some good stuff, like The In-Laws is one of his high spots that people talk about. But But Silver Streak is really, like I said, it's got all the, as I mentioned earlier, everything you want in a film is there. There's disaster movie subplots, and like I said, the romance and the Hitchcock style mystery, and it's just got a little bit of everything. And I totally, and some comedy. There's comedy there too. So there are all kinds of elements that blend together very well. And it's funny, I was out in Los Angeles having dinner with my friend Ray Morton, who is a frequent guest, and he's written quite a few books about the making of books on several notable films. And so we were just strolling through Pasadena after we'd had dinner, and he said, well, right over there is where they filmed such and such scene from Silver Streak, and he just pointed it out as we walked through. And I looked, and sure enough, it was. It's like, oh, nice. Wow, you just never know. So, yeah. But yes,
I recently saw an Arthur Hiller film. Actually, I watched the Americanization of Emily, which I really enjoyed.
Not a bad one. Yes, that's a good one.
Yeah. Not yet. Speaking of being a pacifist and anti-war, I mean, a different kind of anti-war movie, but there's an anti-war sentiment in Harold and Maude. But yeah, I would be curious to watch more of Hal Ashby's stuff because again, like I feel like I've seen the big things of Colin Higgins's catalog now, with this being kind of like the last thing seemingly. Again, I didn't do any of this intentionally; it just kind of happened that way. The only thing I haven't seen is Silver Streak and The Devil's Daughter. So I mean, I would be curious to watch at least Silver Streak. I mean. You haven't mentioned The Devil's Daughter, so I mean,
I never saw The Devil's Daughter. Actually, I'm aware of it, but that's one that's a blind spot for me. So yeah, I must say
it's a TV movie. That's all I know. But yeah, no, Foul Play is great. I mean, I enjoy the characters that Colin Higgins is able to create, and I feel like if there had been a sequel or a prequel, I'm sure they would have been fantastic. Like, I'm sure they would have been worth watching, worth checking out, especially if he was the one doing the script, because he seemed to have a pretty good grasp on how to make interesting characters that are worth spending the entire movie with. And I mean, a scene as simple as, Bud Cort doing somersaults in the middle of a field and Ruth Gordon watching him is just so, I mean, again, it's so simple, but at the same time, like, you get so much of the characters and their performances from just these little scenes together. And the entire movie in a lot of ways is just these little moments strung together between them. And again, like, I'm not saying it shouldn't work, but Ruth Gordon's lust for life and like yearning to live is so infectious that she acts like, a teenager, and he acts like the old man. But then once they meet one another in the middle, it's, we haven't even talked about it. And again, like, I feel like it's something worth mentioning, but the Cat Stevens music, which was originally supposed to be Elton John. And then, Cat Stevens comes in and ends up doing the music. I mean, I would say that the music from this movie is rather well known. I feel like, I mean, if you've never seen this movie, there's a more than 0% chance that you've heard the song, I feel like, from the movie. If you want to sing out, sing out. I feel like it's pretty well known. But the music in this movie, I think, is also perfect for what this movie is.
Yep, totally agree. And it's interesting that the complete soundtrack to the film was not issued until, I think, in the last 10 years. It finally, because there's been several issues of it, but they were missing key tracks from the film. But there was finally a complete version of it that was released, I think, on Record Store Day several years back. So sometime in the last 10 years. But yeah,
2 years ago.
Yeah, Wow. Took them a long time. But
yeah, because we're talking 2022, and the movie came out in 1971. Yeah, that's a very long time, and it's worth it though, because the soundtrack is that good. I mean, it's Cat Stevens, it's Cat Stevens, and then it's also, I mean, again, it's also the characters in the movie singing Cat Stevens from time to time, which again, like, is fantastic. I think, I'm not old enough to know any of the controversy surrounding Cat Stevens and Yusuf Islam. So I have no opinion on that. I know very little about it other than, again, the base amount of research to be done regarding things related tangentially to this movie. But I like his music for the most part. And I actually don't. What's weird is, like, if you were to step back into the alternate universe where this movie exists, but the music is Elton John, I feel like I don't know if Elton John has that same feel, that folksy feel that Cat Stevens does, that I feel whenever I listen to Cat Stevens for the most part. Like, it's just inherent to the music that Cat Stevens makes, I feel like.
Yeah. Elton John did a film score similar to this one for a film called Friends in 1971. And that was also a Paramount release too, I believe. So yeah, he did do something similar to that around the same time. So that might have been why they had him in mind, because he had previously done that. But I think he was more content on moving along with his solo career as opposed to being a film scorer, as it were. So yeah, but I do have the soundtrack from Friends. It is what it is, and it actually had a charting single. The song Friends got into the 30s because I'm the chartaholic. As I said, I know all these chart positions. So,
well, did If You Want to Sing Out, Sing Out, it charted, right?
No, it did not.
Wow, that's a shame.
Not a charting single. It may have gotten in the Hot 100, but it certainly didn't make the top 40. And you never can tell about these things. It's funny how, but then again, it's not really a surprise when you think about it, because the film itself wasn't a success. So
right,
it's no surprise that the songs from the film wouldn't have been a success either, because it just all kind of came and went so quickly, and it took time to build. But but it looks like we've got our work to do. It looks like we maybe can reconvene at a later date for Silver Streak or one of the Hal Ashby.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, I mean, the way you've kind of talked about Silver Streak, I feel like, like you mentioned, we had been kind of doing our own just kind of thing on the side, because why not? And like, I think you're right. Like, it sounds like a fun time. And like I mentioned, I mean, Colin Higgins' work at this point, I am almost completely familiar with. Like, it is the real big last thing left. And not that I'm some sort of completionist, because I'm not, but at this point, mine as well. And the way you're talking rather glowingly about it. And plus, it has Gene Wilder, who I haven't seen enough things. I mean, again, I've seen what I would consider to be, for people my age, The Thing, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, or I guess Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. But for me, like, I haven't seen Gene Wilder in enough stuff, so I'll also jump at the opportunity to see Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor in a movie together, which I know was like a big pairing at the time, and a pairing that would happen multiple times, as it were. So yeah, I would totally watch it. I would be game. I mean, again, like, I enjoyed this movie a lot. Like that. That is the thing. To bring this full circle, like, this movie lived up to the expectations of the people that I have heard talk about it, and it lived up to the hype, as it were. I mean, again, I know that this is a movie that means a lot to a lot of people, and it's a movie that people have commiserated over, and, it's an important movie to certain people's relationships, and this is a movie that they bonded with their significant other or their partner over. And I mean, again, two against the world in a lot of ways, like, two weirdos taking on the the world together. And like there is some of that in this movie. I mean, again, there are other movies like it, but for me, this movie, like, I completely understand now why this movie is so important to so many people, and why so many people feel so strongly about this movie the way that they do. Because, like I mentioned, this is a movie that I will not only be sharing with my significant other, but it's also a movie that I will genuinely revisit every couple years, because even watching it 2 times, I took away different things from it. And like, I can only imagine as a older adult the things that I might take away from it. So it lived up to the expectations for me, which I'm not saying movies don't, but sometimes you watch movies like this from this time period, from like the 60s, from like broadly, I would say between the 60s and the 80s, there are a lot of important movies that come out. And sometimes I understand why they're important just by watching them. And sometimes you have to do a little bit more research to understand why they're so important. And watching this movie, I kind of understand it on the face of it. And I also, like we've mentioned, I understand why this movie took a little while to gain some heat, as it were, because 71 is not necessarily a time to be forcing people to have an existential crisis.
This is true. Yes.
So yeah, Adam, final thoughts on Harold and Maude.
I just think it's a beautiful film that gets better with each viewing. It's one of those, just is rewarding on so many levels, and has rewarded me over the 40 plus years that I've had a relationship with it. And I always look forward to revisiting it from time to time. Never tire of it. And it's a film that I will continue to revisit as the years roll on. But my kids are very familiar with it. I showed it to them when they were very young. I think my son was 11 or 12, and my daughter wasn't much older than that when she saw it. So they're very familiar with it as well. So it's a family affair, as it were.
Well, and I mean, again, like this is the movie that I can completely understand sharing with someone, and then kind of charting the way you interact with it, or the way that they interact with it. Because again, like there is a lot going on, and it's a movie that I think speaks to a lot of people in a lot of different ways. But again, I mean, living and living honestly, I think, is an important thing that's hard to come by in this day and age for a lot of people. And I understand, and I love a good movie that is entertaining, that feels genuine, but also at the end of the day has a message that I think I agree with and that resonates very strongly with me, which is, life is tough, but sometimes life being tough makes the parts of life that aren't tough that much more worth living for. And it makes those moments in life that much more enjoyable, because there has been trials and tribulations and things people have to live through no creation of their own. Because
that's right.
Maude didn't make the Holocaust happen any more than any character in this movie did, but her ability to live and laugh through the tears of the existence that must have been, to then go on to be this person who is so vivacious in life that she can turn around the life of someone else who is so unfamiliar directly with death, but believes that they are, and ends up walking away with a new appreciation for life. Is just, I mean, again, it's a message that I think is immensely important, especially in these trying times, as it were, which I feel like I say all the time now. But yeah, I enjoyed this movie, and I'm so glad we got to talk about it together. This was a good one. It's a good way to start off the year. And again, in terms of romantic comedies, it's a little bit of a romantic comedy tragedy, but that's okay. And, a little honesty, a little realness never hurt anybody. I think I appreciate a movie that's honest more than a movie that coddles me as a film goer. So
I would tend to agree. Yes,
yeah.
Gives you a little food for thought.
Yeah. So yeah, on that note, let's take a break, and we will play a preview and some ads for the next Culture Cast.
Hi, I'm Susan.
And I'm Sharon. And we're the hosts of 80s TV Ladies.
Check us out wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
And please like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at 80s TV Ladies.
You can find interviews and exclusive behind-the-scenes content on all of your favorite 80s TV ladies.
80s TV Ladies is the place to go. Please join us.
Hi, this is HP from Noise Junkies.
And this is Father Malone from Dark Destinations.
Please join us as we examine one of the greatest sitcoms in television history, Taxi, on Night Mr. Walters, a Taxi podcast.
Good night, Mr. Walters.
Good evening, and welcome to Night Gallery.
Thank you, Rod. And I want to welcome everyone to Midnight Viewing, where once a month we talk all about your follow-up to The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling's Night Gallery.
They say it's Rod Serling's Night Gallery, and it isn't really Rod Serling's Night Gallery, it's somebody else's.
Oh, we know. We talk about it a lot. Your curators at Midnight Viewing are the projection booth's Mike White.
What can happen to human beings when trust is wiped out by suspicion?
And CultureCast's Chris Stashew.
Small boy encased in a crystal ball.
And I'm Father Malone.
The kind of thing that usually infests nightmares.
Join us monthly at Midnight Viewing, the Night Gallery podcast at weirdingwaymedia.com.
Doesn't remotely belong to me. I have no proprietary interest in that at all.
He was due here half an hour after me. There's been a mistake.
When the records don't balance, all the alarm bells start ringing in the records office.
Oh, so there have been mistakes.
We'll explain your grave error to Squadron Leader Carter and ask him to follow you. Oh, Peter, it was a cruel joke.
If it was on me. I've fallen in love because of your mistake. Well, if it's a respectable place, there must be a law of appeal. But this has never been done.
I call Squadron Leader Peter D. Carter. You claim you love her.
I do love her.
Would you die for her?
I would, but I'd rather live.
That's right. On the next CultureCast, we are going to be talking about A Matter of Life and Death from 1946 with David Niven, I believe, which I am super excited to talk about because David Niven's great. On that episode, I'm going to be joined by Mike White and someone's favorite productions, Professor Will Dodson. So until then, Adam, where can people find you and the things that you work on?
Well, there's if you want to read my weekly column, that's at focusnewspaper.com. It's published every Thursday in both print and online, where I do a roundup of physical media releases and recent theatrical and streaming releases.
Well, you can find the things that I work on over at weirdingwaymedia.com, where I work on this show and so many other shows, but there are also plenty of other great shows on the network, including Cambridge and Wishawn, Feminine Critique, 80s TV Ladies, Twisted and Uncorked. Lots of great shows that are totally worth checking out, and you should over at weirdingwaymedia.com. As for this show, culturecast.com. Patreon.com/culturecast is where you can go to support the show financially. Every little bit helps. And if you get in at the $10 level, you can listen to Rankin' on Bond, a show that I do with the projection booth's Mike White, and Rankin' on Basses and DC Titans writer and executive producer Rich Haddam, where we talk about James Bond movies once a month. And you can find all of that over at patreon.com/culturecast. Again, big thanks as always to Adam for coming on the show and talking about Harold and Maude. And we'll catch you on the next episode.